Blood always looks black under the neon lights of the city. Quinn learned that the hard way, kneeling on the wet asphalt with a gun pressed to the base of her skull. She didn't pray. She just looked up at the man holding the leash of the city's underworld and made the most desperate gamble of her life. "Pretend you love me," she whispered, blood staining her teeth. Gabriel Costa didn't laugh. He just pulled the trigger on her executioner and made the lie a reality. The ringing in Quinn's ears didn't stop when the body hit the ground. It just changed pitch, a high, thin whine that drilled into her temples. The man who had been holding the gun to her head a second ago was now a crumpled heap of wool and ruined tissue. Gabriel Costa lowered his weapon. It wasn't a hand cannon from a movie. It was a compact, matte black Sig Sauer, and he reholstered it inside his tailored jacket with the bored efficiency of a man putting away his wallet. He didn't look at the body. He looked at Quinn. His eyes were flat, the color of scraped iron. "Get up," he said. His voice didn't boom. It was a rasp, quiet and entirely devoid of adrenaline. Quinn's knees screamed in protest, scraping against the gravel and broken glass of the alleyway. The rain had started 10 minutes ago, a freezing Boston drizzle that soaked through her cheap trench coat. Her brother's debt was $40,000. It felt like a phantom weight crushing her shoulders. Liam had run. He always ran. And the people he owed had found her leaving her shift at the hospital pharmacy. She stood. She was shaking so hard her teeth clicked, but she forced her jaw shut. Gabriel pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. Plain white linen. He held it out. Quinn stared at it, then at him. He was younger than the whispers made him out to be. Maybe 35. There was a permanent crease between his brows, a ledger of sleepless nights and calculated violence. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like an accountant who had decided to start killing people. "Your lip is bleeding," he said. She took the cloth, pressed it to her mouth. It smelled like cedar and clean laundry. "You killed him." "He was a liability." Gabriel checked his watch, a silver Patek Philippe that caught the harsh glare of the sodium street lamp. "And you made a proposition. Let's hear it." Quinn swallowed. The taste of copper coated her tongue. She had spoken out of pure animal panic when the barrel touched her spine. "Pretend you love me." It was a ridiculous thing to say, but she knew the rumors. Everyone in the North End knew the rumors. Gabriel Costa was inheriting a fractured syndicate. The old guard thought he was too cold, too detached, too unstable to lead. They wanted a family man. They wanted stability. "My brother owes your people 40 grand, she said, forcing her voice to stop vibrating. You were going to have me killed to make a point, but a dead pharmacist doesn't get you your money, and it doesn't solve your PR problem with the commission." Gabriel tilted his head, a fraction of an inch. "I don't have a PR problem." "You need to look human," Quinn countered. The fear was receding, replaced by a hollow, terrifying clarity. "You have a sit-down with the New York bosses this weekend. You walk in there alone. You're the ruthless upstart who just took over his uncle's territory in a bloodbath. You walk in there with a civilian fiancé, someone normal, someone who anchors you. You're a man building a future. You're stable." He stared at her. The silence stretched. The rain hit the dumpsters, a steady rhythmic drumming. Two of Gabriel's men stood at the mouth of the alley, silent silhouettes in the fog, waiting for a signal to drag her body away. "You're shaking," Gabriel noted. "Because I'm freezing, and I just watched a man die. And you want to attach yourself to me." "I want to live," Quinn said simply. "Wipe Liam's debt. In exchange, I belong to you for the next 6 months, dinner parties, galas. I will smile. I will hold your hand. I will look at you like you hung the moon. I'm a quick study. When the commission is satisfied and your seat is secure, we have a quiet, mutual breakup. You keep your empire. I keep my pulse." Gabriel stepped closer. The smell of the alley, rotting cardboard, exhaust, blood, was suddenly overpowered by the faint, sharp scent of his cologne. He looked down at her. He didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He reached out, his bare fingers cold against her jaw, tilting her face up to the light. He inspected her features like a jeweler looking for flaws in a diamond. "My world is not a stage, Quinn," he said softly. He knew her name. Of course he did. The people I deal with are not easily fooled. If they smell a lie, they won't just kill me. They will peel you apart to get the truth. Then we make it real, she whispered. Gabriel's thumb brushed the corner of her swollen lip. The touch was unnervingly gentle, a stark contrast to the corpse bleeding out by his Italian leather shoes. "Get in the car," he said. The penthouse didn't feel like a home. It felt like a museum exhibit titled Wealth and Paranoia. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor, the glass thick and faintly green. Bulletproof. The furniture was all low profile, sharp angles, slate gray and cold white. There were no photographs, no books with broken spines, just pristine surfaces and the humming silence of central air. Quinn sat on the edge of a vast, unyielding sofa. She was wearing clothes that didn't belong to her. Earlier that afternoon, a woman named Beatrice had arrived with 2 rolling racks of garments. There was no pretty woman montage. It was a clinical, exhausting fitting. Beatrice measured Quinn with cold efficiency, pinning silks and wools to her frame. "Mr. Costa prefers muted tones," Beatrice had instructed, tight-lipped. "Navy, charcoal, burgundy, no loud prints. You are an asset, not a distraction." Now, Quinn wore a dark emerald evening gown that hugged her ribs and pulled at her feet. It felt like armor. Gabriel walked into the living room. He had changed into a tuxedo. He looked impeccable, severe, and entirely unapproachable. He held 2 crystal tumblers with 2 fingers of amber liquid in each. He handed her one. "Drink," he said. She took it. "What is it?" "Macallan, it'll settle your nerves. Your hands are twitching." She looked down. He was right. She took a sip. It burned a fiery path down her throat, settling into a heavy warmth in her chest. Gabriel sat opposite her in a leather armchair. He didn't slouch. "The charity gala tonight is hosted by the Regional Hospital Board, but the attendees are our real audience. 3 capos from New York will be there. They aren't coming for the silent auction. They're coming to evaluate you." "Yes." He took a slow drink. "You are Quinn Hayes. We met 6 months ago at a fundraiser for pediatric care. I spilled coffee on your coat. I insisted on paying for the dry cleaning. I was persistent. You were reluctant." "Why was I reluctant?" "Because you read the news," Gabriel said, his tone dry. "You knew who I was, but I won you over. I showed you a side of me the papers don't see." Quinn offered a small, bitter smile. "Does that side exist?" Gabriel looked at her over the rim of his glass. For a second, something flared in his eyes, a flicker of irritation, or maybe exhaustion. Tonight it has to. An hour later, the black SUV pulled up to the curb of the Plaza Hotel. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. Photographers clustered near the velvet ropes. The flashbulbs were a sudden, violent assault. "Wait," Gabriel said, his hand closing over her wrist just as she reached for the door handle. Quinn froze. He leaned in. The confined space of the car suddenly felt suffocatingly small. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely focused, like a predator calculating a jump. "Once that door opens, you are mine," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears only. "You don't flinch. You don't look away from me. If someone speaks to you, you answer, but you defer to me. Not because you're weak, but because we are a unit. Understand?" "I understand." "Show me." Quinn took a breath. She forced the muscles in her neck to relax. She looked into his flat, iron-colored eyes, and she lied. She let her gaze soften. She parted her lips slightly, channeling every ounce of desperation she had into a look of absolute, terrifying devotion. She reached up, her fingers lightly brushing the lapel of his tuxedo. "I'm ready, Gabriel," she said, her voice a soft, intimate purr. Gabriel's chest stopped moving. He stared at her, the muscle in his jaw ticking once. Then he broke the gaze, unlatching his door. "Good." He stepped out, buttoning his jacket, and walked around to her side. When he opened the door and offered his hand, the transition was flawless. The ruthless mob boss vanished. In his place was a man violently, obsessively in love. His fingers intertwined with hers. They weren't cold anymore. They were searing hot. As she stepped out onto the red carpet, his hand slid from hers to the small of her back. The touch was heavy, possessive. It wasn't a gentle guide, it was a physical claim. Mine. The cameras flashed. The noise was deafening. "Smile," he murmured against her temple, his breath warm on her skin. Quinn smiled. They moved through the ballroom. It was a sea of expensive perfume, clinking glass, and predatory gazes disguised as polite interest. Quinn played her part. She laughed at the right moments. She kept her posture perfect. But that the real performance came from Gabriel. He was a revelation. Every time she spoke, he looked at her mouth. When a waiter brushed past her too closely, Gabriel shifted, a subtle, fluid movement that placed his body between her and the threat. When a portly man with a thick New York accent, one of the capos, Quinn realized, asked her a pointed question about her family, Gabriel's hand tightened on her waist. "Quinn's family is quiet." Gabriel intervened, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Unlike ours, Sal, we prefer to keep her out of the noise." Sal chuckled, but his eyes were calculating. "A protective man. Good. A man with something to lose is a man you can trust." Gabriel looked down at Quinn. And for a terrifying, breathless second, Quinn forgot they were acting. The look in his eyes was so raw, so entirely consumed by her, that the breath caught in her throat. He lifted a hand, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His thumb lingered on the pulse point at her jaw. He could feel her heart hammering. He had to. "I have everything to lose," Gabriel said. He didn't look at Sal when he said it. He only looked at her. The silence in the SUV on the ride home was heavy. It wasn't the tense, awkward silence of strangers. It was the suffocating quiet of an adrenaline crash. Quinn stared out the window at the passing streetlights. They painted rhythmic streaks of yellow across the leather interior. Her jaw ached from smiling. Her feet were screaming in the designer heels. But mostly her skin felt overly sensitive, hypersensitive to where Gabriel's hands had been all night. He was sitting beside her, staring straight ahead. The illusion was gone. The devoted fiancé had been packed away the second the car doors locked. He was back to being a statue. "You did well," he said to the petition separating them from the driver. "Did they buy it?" Quinn asked, her voice sounding raspy, exhausted. "Sal bought it. The others are waiting to see if it lasts." He unbuttoned his collar, loosening his bow tie. The gesture was surprisingly human, a brief display of fatigue. "Tomorrow you'll be moved out of the guest room into the primary suite." Quinn turned her head sharply. "Why?" "Because Sal has eyes in my building. The doorman, maybe the cleaning staff," Gabrielle said, turning to look at her. "Fiancés don't sleep in the guest wing. Not if the man is as obsessed with her as I made them believe tonight." Quinn swallowed. "I thought there were boundaries. The boundary is the front door of the apartment. Inside, we maintain the perimeter." His eyes tracked down her face, settling on her throat. "It's a king-sized bed, Quinn. I sleep on the left. You sleep on the right. I have no interest in crossing the mattress." "Right, of course." She looked back out the window. She felt a weird, entirely irrational sting of rejection. It was stupid. She was a hostage with a contract, not a bride. The SUV slowed as it turned onto a narrow, one-way street approaching his building. That was when the back window exploded. There was no cinematic screech of tires, no dramatic warning, just a concussive crack. the sickening sound of safety glass shattering inward, and the immediate, deafening roar of wind and panic. Before Quinn's brain could even process the sound of the gunshot, Gabriel moved. He didn't yell. He didn't draw his gun. He threw his entire body weight over hers. Quinn was slammed down into the leather seats, her face pressed against the crease of the cushions. Gabriel was a heavy, immovable shield on top of her. The world devolved into chaos. Another gunshot. The SUV swerved violently, throwing them against the passenger door. Tires shrieked against asphalt. "Keep your head down!" Gabriel barked, his voice vibrating against her spine. More glass rained down on them. Quinn couldn't breathe. The smell of burnt powder and ruptured leather filled the cabin. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the burning tear of a bullet. The driver, a quiet man named Thomas, was shouting something up front, wrenching the wheel. The heavy vehicle lurched, jumping a curb. The chassis groaned, metal scraping against concrete. Then, acceleration. The SUV tore down an alley, leaving the pops of gunfire behind. Quinn lay pinned, gasping for air. Gabriel's weight didn't shift. He was crushing her, his hands gripping the edges of the seat on either side of her head. "Thomas!" Gabriel shouted over the wind rushing through the blown-out windows. "We're clear, boss. Lost him on the turn, taking the secondary route to the safe house. Call it in. I want the streets locked down." Gabriel finally pushed himself up. He grabbed Quinn by the shoulders, pulling her upright. His grip was bruising. "Are you hit?" he demanded. His eyes were wide, the flat iron color fractured by a manic, violent energy. He didn't wait for her to answer. His hands moved over her, frantic and clinical, checking her arms, her neck, her torso for blood. "No!" Quinn gasped, batting his hands away. "No, I'm fine. I'm fine." Gabriel stopped. He stared at her face. Her cheek was bleeding from a tiny shard of flying glass. He stared at the bead of blood with an intensity that made Quinn's breath hitch. He reached out, his thumb swiping the blood away. His hand was shaking. Gabriel Costa, the cold, untouchable king of the city, had a tremor in his fingers. He realized it a second later and pulled his hand back, curling it into a fist. The mask slammed back into place. The violent energy vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying wrath. "Thomas!" Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a dead, Arctic calm. "Find out who sanctioned that." "Yes, Mr. Costa." The rest of the ride was conducted in a ringing silence. They didn't go to the penthouse. Thomas drove them to an underground garage beneath a nondescript commercial building in the financial district. Gabriel led her to a private elevator. He didn't hold her hand this time. He stood 2 feet away, his jaw locked, staring at the floor numbers ticking upward. The safe house was smaller than the penthouse, spartan and entirely devoid of windows. It smelled like dust and bleach. Quinn stood in the center of the living room, hugging her arms around herself. The adrenaline was draining out of her, leaving behind a cold, nauseating dread. She was a civilian. She was a pharmacist who argued with insurance companies for a living. She had just been shot at. Gabriel walked into the adjacent bathroom. He came back a minute later holding a damp towel and a first aid kit. He walked up to her. "Sit down." She sat on the edge of the drab grey sofa. He stood between her knees, snapping open the plastic kit. He took out an alcohol wipe. "This will sting," he said. He didn't hand it to her. He leaned in, his free hand cupping the back of her neck to hold her steady. His skin was warm. He dabbed the wipe against the cut on her cheek. Quinn hissed, her hands flying up to grip his wrists. Gabriel froze. He looked down at her hands, pale and trembling, wrapped around his cuffs. Then he looked at her face. They were inches apart. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy. Thick. "Why did you do that?" Quinn whispered. Her voice cracked. "Do what?" "Throw yourself over me." She searched his eyes, looking for the lie. "I'm a prop, Gabriel. A rented asset. You're the boss. If you die, your whole syndicate collapses. You don't use yourself as a meat shield for a human PR campaign." Gabriel stared at her. The silence stretched, tight and fragile as a piano wire. His thumb moved, almost imperceptibly, against the nape of her neck. "A dead fiancé," he said softly, his voice rough. "Would look very bad for my image." It was an excuse, a deflection. Quinn could hear it in the way the words dragged. She didn't let go of his wrists. "Try again." Gabriel's eyes darkened. The flat iron turned into something deeper, something turbulent and dangerously unresolved. He dropped the alcohol wipe on the coffee table. He didn't step back. He stayed right where he was, caged between her knees, his hand still resting heavily on the back of her neck. "You made a deal with me, Quinn," he said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a low, predatory murmur. "You belong to me for 6 months. No one touches what is mine. Not a sniper, not a rival, no one." It wasn't a confession of love. It was a statement of ownership. But beneath the cold possessiveness, Quinn heard the tremor again. The raw, jagged edge of a man who had spent his entire life detached from the world, suddenly realizing he was tethered to it. He looked at her mouth. Just a fleeting glance, but it sent a shockwave of heat straight down her spine. Then he stepped back. The tether snapped. "Get some sleep," Gabriel said, turning towards the hallway. "Tomorrow we find out who tried to kill you, and then I am going to bury them." The safe house smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Quinn woke up on the grey sofa with a stiff neck and a mouth that tasted like old pennies. She sat up, peeling the thin fleece blanket off her legs. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, a low, insectoid hum that vibrated in her molars. Gabriel was at the small Formica dining table. He hadn't slept. His tuxedo jacket was draped over a plastic chair, and his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faint, silvery scars. He was disassembling his Sig Sauer. Click! Slide! Clack! His hands moved with mechanical precision. A man named Declan, broad-shouldered, with a broken nose and eyes like chipped flint, stood by the reinforced steel door. "Morning," Quinn croaked. Gabriel didn't look up from the gun barrel. "Thomas brought clothes. In the duffel by the bathroom. Change. We leave in 20 minutes. Quinn looked at the black canvas bag. "Where are we going?" "Back to the penthouse." He picked up a cloth, wiping down the slide of the weapon. "The immediate threat is neutralized." Quinn paused, one hand on the zipper of the duffel bag. The word neutralized hung in the sterile air. It was a sterile, corporate word for a very messy reality. "Who was it?" she asked. Gabriel snapped the slide back onto the frame. The metallic clack was loud in the small room. He finally looked at her. His eyes were devoid of the frantic energy from the car. They were dead. Empty. "An old associate," Gabriel said. "A man named Carmine." He felt my transition to power was an insult to his years of service. "Felt," Quinn repeated. Past tense. Declan shifted his weight by the door. He didn't say a word, but the slight adjustment of his posture told Quinn everything she needed to know. Carmine was dead. The man who ordered the hit on them last night had been found, and Gabriel had spent the hours while she slept handing down a death sentence. Quinn took the duffel bag into the bathroom. She stripped off the ruined emerald gown. It was heavy, reeking of gunpowder and fear. She left it in a heap on the linoleum floor. She put on the clothes provided, a pair of dark jeans and a heavy charcoal sweater that swallowed her frame. When she came out, Gabriel was wearing his jacket. He looked entirely composed. The tremor from the night before was gone. "I need to go to work," Quinn said. Gabriel stopped by the door. "Excuse me? I have a shift at the hospital pharmacy at noon." She crossed her arms. "I'm a civilian, Gabriel. Civilians go to work. If I disappear the day after you parade me in front of the New York capos, it looks suspicious. Sal's people will notice." Gabriel stared at her. "Someone put a bullet through my window 12 hours ago. And you neutralized him," Quinn countered, keeping her voice even. "If we hide, we look weak. If I go to work, we look untouched." Silence stretched between them. Declan cleared his throat, a low rumble. "She's not wrong, boss. Word on the street is you're rattled. Sending her to work. It sends a message. Business as usual. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He looked at Quinn. Really looked at her. He was searching for the crack in her armor, the hysteria he expected from a woman who had almost died. But Quinn just stared back. She was terrified, yes, her stomach was a knot of ice. But she also understood the game now. She was a piece on his board. If she didn't play her part, she was useless. And useless things got discarded. Declan drives you, Gabriel said finally, his voice a low rasp. He stays in the pharmacy. He walks you to the bathroom. He doesn't leave your line of sight. Understood? Understood. Gabriel closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped inches from her. He reached out, his knuckles brushing the heavy wool of her sweater just above her collarbone. If anything feels wrong, he murmured. You drop whatever you are holding, and you let Declan get you out. You don't hesitate. You don't think. Okay. His eyes dropped to her mouth, just a fraction of a second. Then he turned and walked out the door. The pharmacy was a sanctuary of routine. Counting pills, checking interactions, printing labels. The mundane tasks grounded Quinn, pushing the memory of shattering glass to the back of her mind. Declan sat in the waiting area, a mountain of a man reading a 3-day-old copy of Sports Illustrated. The hospital staff gave him wide berths. By the time her shift ended at 8, Quinn felt almost normal. That illusion shattered the moment she stepped into the penthouse elevator. The doors opened to the primary suite. Gabriel's instructions from the night of the gala echoed in her head. You'll be moved out of the guest room. The boundary is the front door. Her meager belongings had been relocated. The suite was massive, dominated by a king-sized bed with dark, heavy linens. A wall of windows overlooked the Boston skyline, the city lights glittering like scattered diamonds on black velvet. She was sitting on the edge of the mattress when the front door of the apartment opened and closed. Heavy footsteps moved through the living room. Quinn stood up, her pulse quickening. She walked to the doorway of the bedroom. Gabriel was in the kitchen. The lights were off, save for the blue glow of the refrigerator. He had taken his jacket off. His tie was gone. He was leaning heavily against the marble island, one hand gripping the edge so hard his knuckles were white. The other hand was pressed against his ribs. Quinn stepped forward. Gabriel? He flinched. He actually flinched. He spun around, his right hand dropping instinctively toward the holster at his waist before he registered her face. He let out a harsh breath, turning back to the counter. You should be asleep. It's 9 o'clock. She moved closer. The smell hit her then. It wasn't the clean scent of cedar and expensive laundry. It was the sharp, metallic tang of blood, mixed with the acrid stench of a chemical fire. She stopped a few feet away. You're hurt. It's fine. Take your shirt off. Gabriel turned his head, his iron eyes narrowing. Go to bed, Quinn. I am a licensed medical professional. You are bleeding on a custom marble countertop. She didn't wait for permission. She closed the distance. Take it off, or I'll cut it off. For a moment, he looked like he was going to argue. A muscle ticked in his jaw. The untouchable boss, unused to being given orders in his own home. But the exhaustion won. With a grimace, he unbuttoned the ruined shirt and let it drop to the floor. Quinn swallowed hard. His torso was a roadmap of violence. Old scars, puckered and white, crisscrossed his ribs and abdomen, but the new injury was an ugly, jagged slice along his left side. It wasn't a bullet wound. It looked like a knife drag. Sit, she ordered, pointing to a bar stool. He sat. Quinn moved to the bathroom, returning with a towel, a basin of warm water, and the high-grade medical kit she had spotted under the sink earlier. She stood between his knees, just as he had done for her in the safe house. The role reversal was dizzying. She wet a sterile gauze pad and began to clean the dried blood from his skin. Gabriel hissed, his abdominal muscles clenching sharply under her fingers. Sorry, she muttered. It needs stitches. Then stitch it. She prepared the needle and the lidocaine. As she worked, The silence in the dark kitchen was absolute, broken only by their breathing. Gabriel didn't look at the wound. He looked at her. Quinn could feel his stare. It was heavy, unblinking. It made her skin prickle. Carmine had loyalists, Gabriel said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was a low rumble in his chest, vibrating against her knuckles as she tied off a suture. A few of them decided to make a last stand at a warehouse in the seaport. Quinn tied the knot, snipped the thread. "Did you neutralize them too?" Gabriel looked down at her hands. "Yes. Does it ever end?" she asked, her voice quiet. She applied a sterile dressing, taping the edges down flat. "Or do you just keep killing people until you're the last one left in a very expensive, very lonely room?" Gabriel's hand shot out. He didn't grab her wrist. He caught her waist. His large hand spanned her side, his thumb resting just under her ribs. The touch was hot, possessive, and entirely deliberate. Quinn froze. Her hands hovered over the medical kit. Gabriel pulled her an inch closer. Just an inch. But it was enough to erase the safe distance between them. She had to tilt her head up to look at him. "I am in a very expensive room," Gabriel whispered, his gaze dropping to her mouth. "But I am not lonely." The air evaporated from Quinn's lungs. This wasn't a performance for Sal. There were no cameras here, no capos. Just the dark kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, and the heavy, intoxicating heat of his body. His thumb stroked the soft cotton of her sweater. A slow, agonizingly gentle movement. "You're blurring the lines, Gabriel," she breathed. "I know." He leaned in. For a second, Quinn thought he was going to kiss her. Her eyes fluttered shut, her body leaning instinctively into his warmth. But he didn't. He stopped a millimeter from her lips. She could feel his breath ghosting over her skin. "We share a bed tonight," he murmured against her mouth. "Left side is mine. Right side is yours. Don't cross the middle, Quinn, because if you do, I won't send you back." He let go of her waist, stood up, and walked down the hall, leaving her standing in the dark with a heart hammering so hard it hurt. Sunday dinners were a non-negotiable institution in the Costa family, even when half the family was dead, and the other half was plotting treason. The private dining room at Il Focolare was cordoned off. 4 armed men stood outside the mahogany doors. Inside, it was a display of obscene wealth and thinly veiled hostility. Quinn sat to Gabriel's right. She wore a high-necked black silk dress. Modest, untouchable. A diamond the size of a hazelnut weighed down her left ring finger, a prop supplied by Beatrice that morning. Across the table sat Gabriel's cousin, Leo. Leo was a viper in a bespoke suit. He had slicked back hair and a smile that never reached his pale, watery eyes. He had been Carmine's protégé, though he had conveniently been out of town during the warehouse shootout. "I must say, Gabriel," Leo drawled, swirling a glass of Barolo. "You're looking well, considering the stress of the week." Gabriel cut a piece of veal. He didn't look up. "The week was productive, Leo. Pruning dead wood usually is." The table went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Leo's smile tightened. He shifted his gaze to Quinn. "And the lovely fiancé. Quinn, isn't it? Tell me, how are you adjusting to our unique family dynamics? It must be a shock. A girl from the pharmacy suddenly thrust into the deep end." "I swim just fine," Quinn said, her voice perfectly level. "I'm sure you do." Leo took a sip of wine. "Though I hear you were quite shaken up the other night in the SUV. A terrible business. It makes one wonder if you have the stomach for this life. A liability is a dangerous thing for a boss to carry." Gabriel stopped chewing. He set his fork down. The soft clink of the silver hitting the china sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Gabriel slowly wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He didn't look at Leo. He looked at Quinn. Then he reached under the table. His hand found her thigh, his fingers wrapping around the silk of her dress, gripping her with a bruising, territorial force. He turned his head slowly to look at his cousin. "Leo," Gabriel said. His voice wasn't raised. It was a terrifying, dead calm. "You seem confused about the hierarchy at this table." Leo swallowed, the smirk faltering. "Gabriel, I was just making conversation." "You don't make conversation with her," Gabriel interrupted, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that carried across the room. "You don't look at her. You don't speak her name unless you are asking her permission to breathe the same air." The men around the table stiffened. Gabriel leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Leo with the lethal focus of a snake about to strike. "Quinn is not a liability. She is the reason you are currently eating veal instead of choking on your own teeth in a seaport warehouse. She is my anchor. She is my future. She is mine. If you ever disrespect her again, I will not neutralize you, Leo. I will ruin you. Do you understand me?" Leo was pale. He nodded quickly, his eyes dropping to his plate. "Understood, boss." Gabriel held the silence for 5 agonizing seconds. Then he picked up his fork. "Good. Pass the salt." The rest of the dinner was a blur. Quinn ate mechanically, her skin burning where Gabriel's hand remained clamped on her thigh for the entire meal. When they finally returned to the penthouse, the adrenaline from the dinner crashed over her. Gabriel walked into the primary suite, stripping off his suit jacket and tearing his tie from his neck. He looked wired, the violent energy from the restaurant still rolling off him in waves. Quinn stood by the door, watching him. "You didn't have to do that," she said to his back. Gabriel stopped. He turned around. "Do what?" "Threaten him. You practically painted a target on my back. Now they all think I'm your weak spot." "You are my weak spot," Gabriel snapped. The words echoed in the massive bedroom. Gabriel stared at her, his chest heaving slightly. The mask was gone. The cold, calculating boss had vanished, leaving behind a man who looked like he was slowly starving to death. "I lied to you in the alley, Quinn," he said, his voice raw. He took a step toward her. "I told you I needed a prop. I told you I needed an anchor for the commission. It was a lie." Quinn's heart hammered in her throat. She couldn't move. "Then why?" "Because you were kneeling in the rain," Gabriel said, taking another step. He was inches away now. "Because you were kneeling in the rain with a gun to your head, and you looked at me, and you were the most beautiful, terrified thing I had ever seen. And I knew if I let you walk away, I would spend the rest of my miserable life looking for you." He reached out, grabbing the sides of her face. His hands were shaking. "The king-size bed rule," Gabriel breathed, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. "I said it because I knew if I touched you, the contract was dead." Quinn looked up into his iron eyes. They were completely undone. She reached up, her fingers wrapping around his wrists. She didn't push him away. "Gabriel," she whispered. She stepped forward, crossing the imaginary line. She kissed him. Gabriel made a sound, a low, desperate groan in the back of his throat. His arms wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision. It was all the fear, the adrenaline, the blood, and the lies of the past week detonating at once. He backed her up, practically throwing her onto the mattress of the king-sized bed. He followed her down, his weight pressing her into the heavy linens. The contract was dead. The lie was real. The morning light filtering through the bulletproof glass was unforgiving. It hit the scattered clothes on the floor, the overturned bedside lamp, and the stark white bandages wrapped around Gabriel's torso. Quinn woke up with her cheek pressed against his bare chest. She could hear his heart beating. A steady, rhythmic thump. It sounded entirely normal. Human. She carefully pushed herself up, pulling the heavy linen sheet over her breasts. Gabriel was already awake. He was lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. The flat iron color of his eyes was softened by exhaustion, but the hyper-vigilance remained. He tracked her movement instantly, his arm wrapping around her waist to pull her back down against his side. "Don't move," he said. His voice was thick with sleep, a low rumble that vibrated against her ribs. "My arm is falling asleep." "Let it." Quinn let out a breath, resting her chin on her crossed arms, looking down at him. In the stark light of day, the madness of the night before should have felt like a mistake. The adrenaline had burned off. The fear was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching exhaustion. But looking at the sharp lines of his face, the dark stubble along his jaw, she didn't feel regret. She felt something far more dangerous. "You have a sit-down in New York tomorrow," she said quietly. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I know. Sal is going to look for a crack. He's going to look at me, and he's going to look at you, and he'll know the dynamic changed. You told me yourself. The commission smells weakness." Gabriel reached up, his rough fingers brushing a tangled knot of hair from her eyes. "It's no longer a performance, Quinn. That makes it a liability." "A liability," she echoed, the word tasting sour. "Because now it's real. Because now they have a lever." He sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at the stitches she had put in his side. He swung his legs over the edge of the mattress, his broad back to her. The scars crisscrossing his skin looked like a map of a very violent, very lonely life. "When it was a contract, you were an asset. If someone took you, I would calculate the loss and retaliate accordingly. It was math." He turned his head, looking over his shoulder at her. "But now?" Quinn asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Now," Gabriel said, the iron returning to his eyes, hard and absolute. "There is no math. If someone takes you, I burn the eastern seaboard to the ground. Sal knows that. The New York families know that. A man who will burn his own empire for a woman is a man who cannot be controlled." He stood up, walking toward the bathroom. He didn't look back as he spoke. "I leave tonight. Declan and Thomas stay with you. You don't leave this penthouse. Not for work, not for coffee. You do not open the door." Quinn watched the bathroom door click shut. The heavy, pressurized silence of the penthouse rushed back in. She spent the day pacing. The sheer scale of the apartment, which had felt suffocatingly large before, now felt like a very expensive cage. She watched the city below. Millions of people going about their Friday, arguing over traffic, buying groceries, living lives entirely detached from the shadow world she had just chained herself to. Her phone rang once. It was a text from her brother, Liam. "Hey Q, heard things cooled down. Might come back to town next week. Can you spot me a few hundred?" Quinn stared at the glowing screen. A week ago she would have panicked. She would have scraped the money together, terrified for his life and hers. Now, looking at the text, she felt nothing but a cold, detached fatigue. She deleted the message and blocked the number. The woman who bled for Liam's mistakes died in that alleyway. Gabriel left at dusk. He wore a charcoal suit and a long wool overcoat. He looked like an executive heading to a board meeting, save for the slight bulge of the shoulder holster beneath his jacket. He didn't offer a dramatic goodbye. He stood by the front door, Declan hovering a respectable distance away in the kitchen. Gabriel reached out, gripping the back of Quinn's neck, his thumb pressing into the pulse point beneath her jaw. He leaned down and kissed her. It was hard, fast, and territorial. "Lock the door," he told Declan as he pulled away. "If anyone comes up that elevator who isn't me, shoot through the wood." "You got it, boss," Declan grunted. The heavy door shut. The deadbolts clicked into place. Quinn was alone with a bodyguard and the echoing silence. By midnight, the storm rolled in. A classic New England nor'easter. Wind battered the thick glass of the penthouse windows, howling like a wounded animal. Quinn sat on the living room sofa, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hands. Declan sat in a wingback chair near the entryway, methodically cleaning a compact submachine gun. The television was on, muted, playing a late-night infomercial. "You should sleep, Miss Hayes," Declan said, not looking up from the oiled rag in his hands. "I'm not tired." She pulled her knees to her chest. "How long does a sit-down usually take?" "Depends. If they like what the boss has to say, a few hours. If they don't." Declan paused, snapping a piece of the weapon back into place. "It takes longer." The elevator chimed. A soft, polite ding that cut through the howling wind outside. Declan froze. The oiled rag dropped to the floor. In a fraction of a second, the bored bodyguard vanished, replaced by a kinetic, lethal machine. He racked the bolt of the submachine gun and moved laterally, positioning himself behind the heavy marble pillar near the foyer. "Get down!" Declan hissed, not looking at her. His eyes were locked on the thick oak door. Quinn dropped her teacup. It shattered on the hardwood, hot liquid splashing her ankles. She scrambled behind the low profile of the sofa, pressing her stomach flat against the floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, bird-like flutter. Silence. The elevator had arrived, but no one knocked. No one announced themselves. "Thomas is supposed to be in the lobby," Quinn whispered, her voice cracking. "Thomas is dead," Declan replied, his tone devoid of emotion. It was a simple statement of fact. Thwack! The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was a heavy metallic thud against the wood of the front door. Then another. They were applying breaching charges. "Cover your ears and open your mouth!" Declan roared. Quinn jammed her fingers into her ears and clamped her jaw open just as the world erupted. The oak door didn't just open. It splintered into 1,000 jagged pieces, blown inward by a concussive force that rattled Quinn's teeth and sent a shockwave of dust and drywall into the room. The smoke alarm began to shriek. Before the dust could even settle, Declan opened fire. The chatter of the submachine gun was deafening, spitting bright yellow flashes into the smoke. Screams echoed from the hallway. Bodies hit the floor. But there were too many of them. Suppressed return fire chewed through the drywall, punching holes in the marble pillar Declan used for cover. "Move to the panic room!" Declan yelled, dropping an empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home. "In the master closet, now!" Quinn scrambled on her hands and knees. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt cordite and pulverized concrete. She crawled past the shattered teacup, her palms bleeding from the shards. She made it to the hallway. She looked back just in time to see a man in tactical gear step through the ruined doorway. Declan aimed, but another man flanked him. 3 suppressed shots. Puffed, pat, apta, ah! Declan jolted backward, his heavy frame slamming against the wall. Blood sprayed across the white paint. He slid to the floor, his gun clattering out of reach. "Declan!" Quinn screamed. She didn't make it to the bedroom. A hand clamped down on her ankle, yanking her backward. She hit the floor hard, the breath leaving her lungs in a violent rush. She kicked wildly, her heel connecting with bone. The man swore, releasing her ankle, but before she could stand, a heavy boot pressed down between her shoulder blades, pinning her to the floor. "Easy now," a voice drawled over the ringing in her ears. The boot lifted. Hands grabbed her by the arms, hauling her roughly to her feet. Quinn blinked through the dust and the stinging smoke. The tactical team parted, making way for a figure in a tailored suit. Leo. Gabriel's cousin stepped over the ruined doorframe, dusting off the lapel of his jacket. He looked around the devastated penthouse, stepping carefully to avoid a pool of blood spreading from one of his own men. He paused near Declan, who was slumped against the wall, breathing in shallow, rattling gasps. Leo kicked Declan's gun further away. He walked up to Quinn. She was trembling violently, her knees barely holding her up. The 2 men gripping her arms held her steady. "Gabriel's interior designer is going to have a stroke," Leo said, offering a thin, chilling smile. Quinn spat at his face. Leo didn't flinch. He slowly pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his cheek. His pale, watery eyes hardened into something venomous. "You see," Leo whispered, stepping into her space, "this is the problem with my cousin. He lost his perspective. Carmine knew it. The commission knows it. He let a street rat play queen, and it made him soft. It made him predictable." "Gabriel is going to kill you!" Quinn rasped. Her throat burned from the dust. "He's going to rip you apart." "Gabriel is in New York," Leo corrected gently. "Sitting in a room with Sal, trying to negotiate peace. By the time he realizes the peace was a distraction, you and I will be long gone. And when I call him and tell him I have his heart in a jar, He will sign over the ports, the supply lines, and the territory. Or I will send you back to him in very small boxes." Leo reached out, his cold fingers tracing the line of her jaw. Quinn jerked her head away. "Bag her," Leo ordered the men. "We take the service elevator. Leave the loyalist to bleed out." A heavy canvas bag was yanked over Quinn's head. The world went completely, terrifyingly black. The smell of brine, rust, and old oil meant the docks. Quinn sat strapped to a metal folding chair. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back, the plastic biting deep into her skin, cutting off the circulation to her fingers. The bag had been removed an hour ago. She was in a cavernous, empty shipping warehouse. Rain hammered against the corrugated tin roof, a relentless, deafening roar. Leo sat on a wooden crate 20 feet away, a burner phone in his hand. 4 men armed with assault rifles stood at the perimeter of the room, shadows cast long and distorted by the harsh glare of a single halogen work light. "He's not answering," Leo muttered, tossing the phone from hand to hand. His initial smugness was fracturing, replaced by a twitchy, nervous energy. Sal was supposed to keep him in the room until 3. Quinn let her head fall back, taking slow, measured breaths. Panic was useless here. She forced her analytical brain, the brain that calculated chemical half-lives and drug interactions, to assess the room. 4 guards, Leo, heavy steel doors at the front, no windows. If Gabriel didn't answer, Leo would panic. If Leo panicked, he would kill her. "Maybe he already knows," Quinn said. Her voice was raspy, dry as sandpaper. Leo snapped his head toward her. "Shut up!" "He told you," she continued, pushing through the fear. "He told you at dinner, Leo. He told you I was his weak spot. Do you really think he went to New York without a contingency?" "I said, shut up!" Leo stood up, pacing the concrete floor. "I bought his men. I bought the lobby guard. I bought the security cameras. He doesn't know anything until I tell him." The heavy steel doors at the far end of the warehouse rattled. The sound cut through the noise of the rain. The 4 guards instantly raised their rifles, snapping the safeties off. Leo froze, his hand dropping to the pistol at his waist. Clang! Something heavy hit the outside of the door. Then a scraping sound. A key turning in an industrial lock. "Fire through the door!" Leo ordered, his voice cracking. "Do it!" The guards opened up. The roar of the rifles in the enclosed space was catastrophic. Sparks flew as bullets punched through the corrugated steel, leaving jagged, glowing holes. They dumped their magazines, the noise echoing like rolling thunder until the weapons clicked empty. Silence rushed back in, thick with the smell of gunpowder. No one pushed the door open. No body fell through the gaps. One of the guards stepped forward, ejecting his magazine. "I'll check it." The lights went out. The single halogen bulb shattered with a sharp pop, plunging the warehouse into absolute, suffocating darkness. Quinn screwed her eyes shut, fighting against her bindings. "NVGs!" Leo screamed in the dark. "Put on your goddamn night vision!" A sickening, wet thud echoed to Quinn's left. It was followed by a choked gurgle, the sound of a man trying to breathe through a severed windpipe. A heavy body hit the concrete. "Where is he?" Leo shrieked. Gunfire erupted again, blind, panicked bursts lighting up the dark in strobing flashes of yellow. In the brief flashes, Quinn saw a ghost. Gabriel wasn't wearing his tailored overcoat. He was dressed entirely in black tactical gear, his face smeared with grease paint. He moved with a horrifying, silent fluidity. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like the apex predator of a very dark jungle. During the next flash of gunfire, Gabriel was behind the second guard. He didn't use a gun. He hooked an arm under the man's chin, a combat knife flashing once in the strobe light. The guard dropped instantly. "Shoot the girl!" Leo roared, total panic consuming him. "Kill the girl!" The third guard pivoted toward Quinn, raising his rifle. Quinn braced for the impact, squeezing her eyes shut. A gunshot rang out, a single deafening crack that wasn't a rifle burst. Quinn opened her eyes. The guard standing 10 feet from her dropped to his knees, A hole punched through his tactical helmet. He collapsed forward. Silence fell over the warehouse again. Just the rain on the roof and the frantic, ragged breathing of Leo. "Gabriel!" Leo whimpered in the dark. The sound of a rat trapped in a corner. "Gabriel, wait. We can negotiate. The commission gave me their blessing." Gabriel's voice came from the blackness. It didn't echo. It sounded like it was right next to Leo's ear. "They don't want a war, Leo. They just wanted to see if I could clean my own house." A flashlight clicked on. The beam hit Leo's face. He was backed against a stack of wooden pallets, his gun shaking violently in his hand, pointed blindly into the light. Gabriel stood just behind the beam. He walked forward slowly. He held a suppressed Sig Sauer in his right hand. His face was a mask of absolute, glacial fury. The tremor Quinn had seen in his hands when she was nearly shot was gone. This wasn't the man who kissed her. This was the monster who built an empire on corpses. "Gabriel, please!" Leo begged, dropping his gun. It clattered on the floor. He raised his hands. "Family. We're family." Gabriel didn't break stride. He didn't offer a monologue. He didn't explain his motives. He walked up to Leo, pressed the barrel of the gun against the center of his cousin's forehead, and pulled the trigger. The suppressed shot was a dull thwip. Leo's eyes rolled back, and he crumpled into a heap of ruined bespoke tailoring. Gabriel lowered the gun. He didn't look at the body. He turned the flashlight toward the center of the room, the beam finding Quinn. He crossed the distance in seconds. He dropped the gun and the flashlight on the floor, pulling a knife from his rig. He knelt behind her, the blade slicing through the thick plastic zip ties in one clean motion. Quinn's arms fell limply to her sides, the blood rushing back into her hands with a violent, agonizing burn. She gasped, leaning forward. Gabriel caught her. He didn't care about the blood on his gear. He didn't care about the dead men in the room. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held her with a desperate, crushing force, his chest heaving against hers. "I've got you!" Gabriel rasped, his voice breaking. He kissed her temple, her cheek, the crown of her head. "I'm here. You're safe." Quinn gripped the heavy fabric of his tactical vest. She smelled copper and rain and gunpowder. She looked over his shoulder at the dead men littering the floor. She looked at Leo, a pool of black blood spreading from his head in the dim light of the dropped flashlight. She wasn't in a romance novel. She wasn't a princess rescued by a knight. She was a civilian who had tied herself to an executioner. "You killed them," she whispered into his chest. Gabriel pulled back slightly, looking down into her face. The glacial fury was gone, replaced by an agonizing vulnerability. He knew what she was looking at. He knew what he had just shown her. The veil was completely gone. "I did," he said, his voice stripped bare. "And I will do it again tomorrow, and the next day to anyone who looks at you. This is what I am, Quinn. I cannot turn it off. I cannot wash it away." He released his grip on her, giving her the space to pull away, to look at him with disgust, to run. Quinn looked at his iron eyes. She thought of Liam, who used her and ran. She thought of a safe, quiet life in a pharmacy, counting pills until she died of old age. And then she looked at the man who had just dismantled his own family to keep her breathing. The lie they started in the alley was dead. This was the terrifying, undeniable truth. Quinn didn't run. She reached up, her trembling, bruised hands cupping his grease-stained face. "Then don't wash it away," she whispered, pulling him back down to her. "Just take me home." Gabriel let out a shuddering breath, wrapping his arms around her and lifting her entirely off the concrete floor, carrying her out into the rain. If you survived this descent into Gabriel and Quinn's dark, gritty world, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to bring you more unapologetic, pulse-pounding Mafia romance. What did you think of Gabriel's brutal devotion? Was Quinn right to stay, or should she have run? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow dark romance addicts. Most importantly, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling, intense storytelling session. See you in the next video.